Listen to this true story that happened in 2019 to a security guard named Marcus working at an abandoned textile factory in North Carolina. Marcus had been doing the night shift for 3 years without any real incident, just walking the empty halls, checking doors, and clocking in at stations throughout the massive 6-story building. Everything was routine until one Tuesday night in November when everything changed. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus was on the 3rd floor doing his usual rounds when he heard what sounded like a child crying coming from the room that was supposed to be locked. His heart immediately started racing because he had access to every single room in that building, and he knew for a fact that room had been sealed and padlocked for over a year. The crying was getting louder, almost like it was calling to him specifically. Marcus took out his master key with trembling hands, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as he approached the locked door. The sound was so real, so desperate, that he found himself moving toward it despite every instinct screaming at him to leave. When he opened that door, the crying stopped instantly, replaced by complete, deafening silence. Inside, there was nothing. Just an empty room filled with old machinery and dust. But the moment he stepped inside, he felt it, a presence so overwhelming, so malevolent, that he physically stumbled backward. His body went cold, every hair on his arm standing straight up. He ran back to the hallway and locked the door immediately, but that's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor. Small footprints. Child-sized footprints. That led into the room from the far wall where there was no door, no window, nothing. No way for those prints to exist. Marcus radioed for immediate backup and tried to remain calm, but his voice was shaking so badly that dispatch could barely understand him. He walked backward down the hallway, never taking his eyes off that locked door, when suddenly he heard it again, the sound of a child giggling, but it was coming from everywhere at once, echoing off the metal walls. The giggling got faster, more frantic, more evil. That's when he heard it, a sound like heavy footsteps, but wrong. Like whatever was making them was walking on all fours, racing through the hallway toward him. Marcus ran. He ran for his life down 3 flights of stairs, his flashlight bouncing wildly, creating grotesque shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of anything physical. He made it to the security office and locked himself inside, gasping for air, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst from his chest. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found him in the office, completely white-faced and unable to speak coherently. They searched the entire building, but found absolutely nothing. No evidence of anyone inside. No footprints except Marcus's own, nothing that would explain what happened. But when they checked the security camera footage from the 3rd floor, they found something even more disturbing. The timestamp showed Marcus entering the hallway at 11:47 p.m., as expected. But then the footage cuts to complete static for exactly 37 minutes. When it returns, Marcus is shown running out of that hallway at full speed, terror written across his face. 37 minutes of his life that neither he nor anyone else could account for. Marcus never worked another shift. He quit that same night and refused to ever enter that building again. To this day, he suffers from severe PTSD and insomnia, seeing that locked room in his nightmares. The factory was eventually demolished in 2021. But before they tore it down, construction workers reported feeling overwhelming dread on the 3rd floor, and one worker claimed to hear a child's laughter even as the building was being destroyed. Marcus's story is one of hundreds reported from that location, and whatever was in that room that night has never been explained. This happened in 2017 to a nurse named Jennifer, who worked the graveyard shift at a regional hospital in Ohio. Jennifer was an experienced nurse with 15 years of experience, not easily spooked, professional, and by the book in everything she did. She was working in the ICU on the night of December 14th when she noticed something odd about one of her patients in room 412. The patient, an elderly man named Robert who had suffered a massive stroke, had been unresponsive for weeks, completely brain dead according to every test. He lay in bed with his eyes open but completely vacant, machines monitoring his every heartbeat and breath. That night, around 2:30 a.m., Jennifer went in to check his vitals and change his IV bag. Everything was routine until she looked into his eyes and saw them slowly, deliberately shift to focus directly on her face. She froze. She had his entire chart memorized. Robert hadn't moved voluntarily in 23 days. His eyes had never tracked anything. Yet there they were, locked directly onto her, with what seemed like complete understanding and awareness. She immediately checked his monitors. His pupils weren't dilated, his heart rate was steady, all his readings were exactly what they should be for a comatose patient. But those eyes never left her. Jennifer left the room and consulted with the other night staff member, a young resident named David, who confirmed what she said. He had also noticed Robert's eyes following people that night. They decided to check in on him more frequently and document what they were seeing. At 3:15 a.m., Jennifer entered the room again for routine monitoring, and this time she watched as Robert's mouth slowly opened, his lips moving as if trying to form words. No sound came out, but his eyes were pleading, desperate, like he was trying to communicate something critically important. She called out for David to come verify what she was seeing, when suddenly alarms started blaring from every monitor in the room simultaneously. Every single readout spiked at once: heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, everything screaming emergency. Jennifer and David rushed in, prepared for a cardiac event. But Robert's body was completely still. His eyes were still locked onto Jennifer's, and his mouth was still moving silently, but his body hadn't changed position at all. They called for a code blue, and within seconds the room was flooded with people. But nothing they did made any difference. All the monitors were maxing out as if his body was in absolute medical crisis, but when they looked at him, everything appeared perfectly normal. Then, as suddenly as it started, every monitor flat-lined simultaneously. They worked on Robert for 45 minutes, but he was gone. What troubled Jennifer most wasn't that he died. EQ patients die all the time. What troubled her was that after his death, when they finally unplugged the monitors, they discovered that every single piece of equipment in that room had malfunctioned. All of them. Complete electronic failure, as if something had overloaded the entire system at once. The biomedical engineers checked everything and found absolutely no explanation. All equipment was brand new, well-maintained, and there was no surge, no logical reason for simultaneous failure. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The very next night, Jennifer was working again, reluctantly, trying to process what happened. At 2:35 a.m., a patient in room 415, just 3 rooms down from where Robert died, started exhibiting the exact same symptoms. Eyes tracking deliberately, mouth moving silently, trying to communicate something. And then the same cascade of monitor failures. Jennifer watched in horror as it happened again. Different patient, same sequence of events, same complete system failure, same death. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer documented 3 more patients dying in exactly the same way, all at different times of night, all with the same pattern: sudden awareness, desperate eye contact, silent mouth movements, complete monitor failure, death. Jennifer reported her findings to hospital administration, but they dismissed it as coincidence and equipment malfunction. She brought her documentation to the hospital's chief medical officer, who reviewed it and became visibly disturbed. He ordered a complete investigation. What they discovered was that Robert had been a patient on that ICU ward for exactly 40 days before his death. And each of the subsequent patients who died in the same manner? They had also been patients for exactly 40 days before their deaths, down to the hour. The hospital eventually launched an internal investigation that went nowhere. However, a private investigator hired by Jennifer discovered something chilling decades earlier in the 1950s. Before the hospital was renovated and expanded, the ICU had been the location of a psychiatric ward. And in 1954, 4 patients had died under mysterious circumstances in that exact section of the ward. There were no records of what killed them, no explanations, just that they had died on their 40th day of hospitalization. Jennifer suffered a complete psychological breakdown and hasn't worked as a nurse since. She now lives with her parents and hasn't been back to any hospital as a patient or employee. The hospital never publicly disclosed the full findings of the investigation, but according to hospital staff who were there, the ICU ward was partially shut down and the entire section where the incidents occurred was completely renovated. But even now, hospital workers refuse to work shifts in the areas near where those deaths occurred, and there's an unofficial list that circulates among night shift staff of patient rooms to avoid if possible. This is the story of Joseph, who worked as a night shift dispatcher for a trucking company in 2018 in rural Nevada. Joseph's job was simple: monitor the radio, track the GPS coordinates of the company's 18 trucks, and ensure safe communication throughout the night. He worked alone in a small office from midnight to 8 a.m., 5 nights a week. The job was usually boring, straightforward, just routine check-ins with drivers making deliveries across the desert highways. Everything changed on October 19th when something started showing up on his GPS system that shouldn't have been there. A blip. A moving target on the map that had no corresponding vehicle, no ID number, no driver name, just a small green dot moving at consistent 60 mph down Highway 95, heading northeast through the empty Nevada desert. Joseph called out on the radio to check if any drivers were on that route. Truck 7, driven by a guy named Dale, confirmed he was on 95 heading northeast. Joseph asked him his current mile marker. Dale responded, "Mile marker 187. The GP's blip was showing mile marker 189, just 1.2 miles ahead of Dale on the same route. Joseph checked his system 3 times. All 18 trucks were accounted for and properly labeled on the map. But this blip with no identifier was still there, still moving at exactly 60 mph, just slightly ahead of Dale's truck. Joseph radioed Dale and asked him if he saw any vehicles ahead of him. Dale reported the highway was completely empty, no cars visible in any direction, just the empty desert for miles. The blip kept moving. Joseph tried to radio to it, assuming it might be a glitched entry for one of his trucks, but got no response. For 37 minutes, Joseph watched this mystery vehicle move down the highway, always exactly 1.2 miles ahead of Dale, moving at exactly the same speed, as if Dale was being led somewhere. Then, at mile marker 206, the blip stopped. Dead. Stop. It didn't slow down, it just instantly ceased moving. Joseph radioed Dale and asked him to slow down. Something was wrong. Dale said he would, complaining that Joseph was being paranoid. 20 seconds later, Dale's truck hit something in the road. At full speed, he plowed into whatever was there, and suddenly his truck was fishtailing across the highway. Joseph heard him screaming on the radio, heard the sound of impact, heard the truck rolling. The transmission cut out. Joseph immediately called 911 and reported an accident on Highway 95 near mile marker 206. Police and ambulance arrived in what Joseph knew was impossibly fast, about 7 minutes, which was impossible for that remote location. they found Dale's truck flipped and destroyed. Dale was dead, crushed under the cab. But here's what made the police officers contact Joseph directly. There was nothing in the road. No debris, no obstacles, nothing that could have caused the accident. Dale's truck had simply driven off the highway for no apparent reason and flipped. The skid marks on the asphalt showed that he had been driving in a perfectly straight line before suddenly veering violently to the right, as if someone or something had forcefully pulled the wheel. Joseph was traumatized but continued working, assuming it was a mechanical failure or that Dale had had a heart attack. But 3 weeks later, on November 9th, the same thing happened again. Another mystery blip appeared on his GPS system. This time, it was ahead of truck 14, driven by a woman named Susan. Joseph was more forceful this time, demanding that Susan reduce speed, reporting his findings to management, calling 911 preemptively. But he couldn't prevent it. The blip stopped at mile marker 178, and Susan's truck hit it anyway, at a lower speed, but she was still injured critically. She survived, but was left paralyzed from the waist down. In the weeks that followed, Joseph became obsessed with understanding what was happening. He pulled records going back 5 years, before he was hired. He found accident reports for that same stretch of highway, all of them strange. All of them involving company trucks driven for no apparent reason off the road on clear nights. 16 accidents in 5 years. 12 of them fatal, all occurring on clear nights when the drivers reported unusual things on the radio before they died. Something on the road, a light ahead, a passenger in the truck they didn't remember picking up. Joseph dug deeper and discovered that the stretch of Highway 95 where all these accidents occurred was known by locals as the Devil's Highway. There were Native American legends about the area, stories of something that walked the desert at night, something that appeared ahead of vehicles and lured them to their doom. There were old reports from the 1800s of wagon trains vanishing on that exact stretch, with only burned-out wagons ever found and no bodies. Joseph reported all of this to the trucking company. Instead of investigating or supporting him, they fired him for spreading superstitious nonsense that was bad for business. He filed complaints with state regulators who investigated the company's safety record but found no legal violations, attributed the accidents to driver error and mechanical failure. The company is still operating today, still running trucks down that highway every single night. And if you look at recent accident reports from that stretch of road, the mysterious accidents continue. The most recent one was in March of this year, a truck driver veering off the highway with no explanation, no mechanical failure, no reason. The driver survived but suffered severe mental trauma and couldn't explain what caused the accident. Joseph now lives in California, rarely speaks about his experience, and has never returned to Nevada. He lives with permanent insomnia and severe anxiety, always feeling like something is watching him, waiting for him to return to that highway. And sometimes, late at night, he still wakes up hearing the sound of his radio from that office, hearing the voices of dead drivers calling out his name, warning him to stay away.